Shakta karmanya vidvamso yata kurvanti bharata kuryad vidvan tata saktash chakir shor loka sangraham. The wise act, those who are unwise, act from attachment to action. And the wise act without attachment, intending to maintain the welfare of the world. It's from the Bhagavad Gita. The focus of the month this month on wise action as well as community building. Start with Martin Luther King quote, where he says that the real revolution needs to be a radical revolution in values. We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. There's a funny story that Ram Dass tells, the teacher Ram Dass. He tells about going to his teacher and asking how to become enlightened, right? Oh, Guru, how can I become enlightened? And the teacher says, feed people. And Ram Dass describes this sort of inner tension he feels. There's this inner resistance he sort of feels to that, right? He's this university professor, he's a thinker, he's a traveler, he's an intellectual, right? So he has a little bit of resistance to it. But the teacher just keeps repeating, feed people, serve people. So, being the devoted student that he is, Ram Dass tries to follow the instructions and to further understand its deeper meaning. And compassionate action and action that comes from an intention of service is, in a way, you can start with before you feel the compassion inside, right? In a way, doing the action of working for the sake of others can bring about the feeling of compassion, the feeling of community, right? So it's not necessarily so even in the Ram Dass story, he doesn't necessarily feel like doing it at first, but by undergoing the action, by undertaking the action, he comes to understand the deeper meaning of what it means to serve people, to feed people. So isn't that funny too? Like sometimes we might see someone in yoga, walk into yoga class, and like our animal brain sort of makes a snap judgment about them. We think like, oh, I don't necessarily like that person, right? But then the more time you spend with someone, you learn one or two things about them, and suddenly you like that person, right? Suddenly you start to develop an affection for people just once you get to know them a little bit. So all situations have context, and Ram Dass further reflects, if someone is hungry, you feed them. That is what service is. But let's say you meet a yogi doing a 9-day fast, and on the 5th day he says, I'm hungry. You say, okay, I'll fast with you. That too is service. Not feeding him turns out to be the right action. And that's where wisdom comes in. That's where discernment comes in, right? The ability, you not only have the intention, but you have that ability to discern like what the most appropriate action might be at any given time. Develops through practice and through meditation and through direct action, right? By taking actions, we become sort of wiser about how to take them better and better, more properly. Speaking of fasting, it's interesting to read this focus of the month in the midst of the political moment that we're going through. particularly where I am. And to sort of have this realization that, like it or not, we are going to need to depend on our communities. And um, even I have friends in North Carolina who just recently went through a big environmental catastrophe. And I was on the phone with one of them, and she said, you know, I would recommend you have water and a first aid kit and stuff, but really it comes down to community. It comes down to the fact that neighbors were helping each other and local people were helping each other. And then, of course, the, people were coming from outside to help too, but that it all came down to that ability to come together as a community. So whether we choose it or not, we may be put in a situation where we need to rely on community and rely on each other. And speaking of fasting, I don't necessarily advocate fasting. I'm definitely not advocating fasting here. It's just an interesting point in Ram Dass's story. But also, I have been reflecting on this idea, like Martin Luther King brings up, about shifting from being thing oriented to being person oriented. And I find I'm craving the same in my personal life. And I'm craving almost a buying fast, right? Really like seeing how much I can restrict my role as a consumer in this society. And it does sort of seem like our identities are more important to governments and corporations as consumers than we are as fully fledged individuals with agency and creativity, etc. So in this effort to sort of contract my role as a consumer, I'm finding that I'm becoming a little bit more creative and it is enhancing my problem solving, right? So in an effort to not buy anything other than, food, or, I've carved out some things that, the first place I think is, do I already have something I can use for this purpose? If not, do I have a neighbor I could borrow it from? Or do I have something that I can use for this purpose, even though that's not in its intended use? Or can I thrift it, right? So depending on where you are, we have buy nothing groups where I am, where even each neighborhood of my city has its own buy nothing group. And in that group, the idea is to only give and receive things for free, no money exchanged. So in giving things away that I no longer need and in accepting free things, I've also had the added benefit of being able to meet more of my community as well. So something to think about in terms of growing our communities and also reflecting on this idea of right action, purposeful action. And then I did want to say just, kind of one more thing, which is that I do see this very pervasive attitude, mostly on the internet, right? Of, we see these slogans on the internet of like, you don't owe anybody anything, right? And while that can be a helpful sentiment, particularly when you're in a situation where you need to protect some boundaries or such like that, it tends to, like most advice, right? It tends to kind of swing a little too far in one direction because of course we owe people things. Of course we owe our very life to the earth energy and people energy that grew the food and that pipes my water to my house and that built my house and that the people that come and go to help me fix my house. And, you know, there's a lot in the sidewalks and the schools, and, you know, there's a interconnectedness of things that, of course, exist in a way, and it's helpful to acknowledge that when we're moving towards a more community-minded type of work. I also saw a beautiful suggestion that I'd like to share with you, which is, you know, sort of as we are imagining our role in community and our place in community, we could reflect on two questions. So the first question to reflect on is, what types of support do I wish that other people would count on me for? What do I wish that people would ask for of me, right? And then part two is, what do I wish I could depend on other people for? What do I wish I could ask my community for, or ask my friends for, right? And then, you know, you can do some reflection on those two, and find, and in those answers, kind of find ways where I can show up more for XYZ, and where maybe I can feel more empowered to ask for ABC, for example, right? I do have some book recommendations this month. So most of you know I'm a big book nerd. The best book I have ever read on the subject of community building is The Different Drum by M. Scott Peck. I've read it 2 or 3 times. I'll probably read it again this month. It is excellent. Please borrow or thrift or go to your library for a copy. Second is How We Show Up, Mia Birdsong, also really nice about expanding our ideas of what community is and what it means. And Garland of Forest Flowers, Swami Nirmalananda, from our very own JIvamukti lineage. And in this volume, there are some wonderful moments about, again, about a shift in our values, and how our inner values and our spiritual practice relate to, you know, the politic and the government and whatnot. And also some really valuable things in terms of that. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this helps, and I can't wait to continue this wonderful discussion with all of you. Feel free to write me a message or put a comment below.